In 1993, a cluster of young, healthy adults in the American Southwest began dying of sudden lung failure, with a case fatality rate above 50%. The cause was a virus no one had even named. But Hantavirus was never going to become the next COVID, and that is exactly what makes it worth paying attention to. So why are biosecurity experts now watching it more closely than ever? The answer has less to do with the virus itself and more to do with a chain of failures most people never see coming. By the end, you will understand why this rodent-borne killer may be the clearest warning of what is actually next. Hantavirus isn't a single virus waiting to spark the next global pandemic. It is a whole family, with more than 24 distinct species, each tied to its own rodent host and each with its own territory and threat profile. Scientists group these viruses under the genus Hantavirus, and what sets them apart is how they cross from wild animals into humans, often with devastating results. But the real story is not just about a rogue microbe. It is about a complex global patchwork of risks, symptoms, and scientific surprises. The family splits along continental lines. In the Americas, the main culprits are Sin Nombre virus and Andes virus. In Europe and Asia, names like Hantaan, Pumala, and Sol dominate. Each one is adapted to a particular rodent: deer mice in the United States, striped field mice in Korea, bank voles in Scandinavia. The virus circulates quietly in these animals, rarely causing them harm, but when it jumps to humans, the outcome can be severe. In the American continents, infection can lead to hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, also called H.POIS. It starts like a flu, fever, muscle aches, fatigue, but within days the lungs fill with fluid. Oxygen levels plummet. In the 1993 Four Corners outbreak, more than a third of patients died. Sin Nombre virus, the strain behind that episode, was unknown before the outbreak. CDC virologist Stuart Nickel said they found a previously unknown virus in deer mice that can cause a rapidly fatal lung disease in people. Meanwhile, in Asia and parts of Europe, old-world hantaviruses like Hantaan and Dobrava trigger a different syndrome: hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome, also called HFRS. Here the kidneys, not the lungs, take the hardest hit. Patients develop fever, bleeding, and sometimes acute kidney failure. Hantaan virus, first isolated in 1978, remains notorious for causing outbreaks with fatality rates up to 15%. Pumala virus, carried by bank voles, usually causes a milder disease called nephropathia epidemica, but even this can hospitalize healthy adults. Despite the frightening numbers, there is a sharp divide between deadliness and contagiousness. Most hantavirus infections require direct or indirect contact with rodent excreta. For example, sweeping out a shed, cleaning a cabin, or disturbing contaminated dust. Human-to-human transmission is almost unheard of. The rare exception is Andes virus, found in Argentina and Chile, which has caused limited outbreaks among close contacts or within families. But even then, the virus struggles to sustain chains of transmission beyond a handful of people. This family split, HPS in the Americas, GFRS in Eurasia, shapes the global risk map. It also explains why hantavirus is not poised to become the next COVID. The biological reality is sobering: high fatality, low transmissibility. But that does not mean the world is safe from regional crises or from the chain reactions that can follow when surveillance, climate, and public health systems fall behind. Hantavirus may strike with deadly force, but its path to new victims is surprisingly narrow. Unlike viruses that pass easily from person to person, most hantavirus infections begin and end with a rodent. The mechanism is almost always the same. A person breathes in dust contaminated with urine, saliva, or feces from an infected animal. There is no cough, no sneeze, no invisible cloud of droplets moving from one human host to the next. This is not a virus built for crowds or for casual contact. Its reproductive number, the average number of people infected by a single case, rarely climbs above 0.3 for strains like Sin Nombre or Hantaan. That is a world away from the R0 of 2.5 to 3.5 seen with early COVID-19. But there is a twist in the story. In the southern Andes, researchers began to notice clusters of severe illness that could not be explained by rodent exposure alone. The Andes virus, carried by the long-tailed rice rat, has broken the rules. During outbreaks in Argentina and Chile, it has been traced from one person to another, between family members, close contacts, even healthcare workers. Epidemiologists tracked the chains and found secondary attack rates as high as 15 to 20% in some clusters. That is still far from the runaway spread of a true pandemic virus, but it is enough to trigger alarm bells among disease trackers. Virologist Pablo J. Padula put it bluntly. Unlike most hantaviruses, Andes can spread from one person to another, especially in close contact settings. Genomic analysis of these outbreaks confirmed what contact tracing suggested. The same virus was moving directly between people, not just jumping from rodents. Yet even here, the virus seems to need prolonged, intimate contact. Most secondary cases occurred after days of shared caregiving or through sexual contact, not from passing encounters or brief conversations. This distinction, deadliness without easy spread, sits at the heart of why hantavirus remains a regional threat rather than a global one. The high fatality rate grabs headlines, but the low transmissibility keeps most outbreaks small and contained. Only Andes virus has come close to breaking that barrier, and even then, its R0 hovers just below the threshold needed for sustained human transmission. In practical terms, it means that while hantavirus can devastate a family or a rural community, it lacks the fuel to ignite a worldwide crisis, at least for now. Still, this rare exception forces public health officials to rethink their surveillance priorities. Diagnostic gaps remain, especially in rural clinics, where PCR testing or strain typing is often unavailable. The Andes virus has shown that under the right circumstances, a rodent-borne virus can adapt just enough to challenge old assumptions. The question is not just whether hantavirus could become the next pandemic, but whether we are paying attention to the warning signs that come before the next spillover event. Heavy rain swept across the Four Corners region in late 1992, turning the normally dry landscape into a patchwork of green. Satellite data from that winter showed the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, NDVI, spiking well above the historical baseline. For ecologists, this was more than a footnote. More plants meant more seeds, and more seeds meant a feast for the local deer mouse population. By spring 1993, field teams were finding 4 times as many deer mice as usual. Trap success rates, which had hovered around 7% in previous years, shot up to nearly 30%. The landscape had shifted, and so had the risk. Brian Yelly, a biologist at the University of New Mexico, spent years tracking these cycles. As he put it, when deer mouse infection rates rise after a rainy winter, human cases tend to follow. His team's data made the connection clear. After a wet season, the odds of finding sin nombre virus in a trapped deer mouse rose sharply. In May 1993, as the mouse population peaked, the first cases of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome appeared in local hospitals. The chain reaction, rainfall, vegetation, rodents, virus played out with mathematical precision. The numbers tell the story. In the months before the outbreak, NDVI readings for the region jumped from a typical 0.15 to over 0.3. Ecologists logged a 4-fold increase in rodent density, and the virus followed its hosts. When the CDC and local teams trapped nearly 1,700 rodents around the affected communities, they found sin nombre virus in every infected deer mouse they tested, but not in other rodent species. The link was undeniable. For the people living in the Four Corners, the consequences were immediate and devastating. By July, 34 confirmed cases had been reported, with a case fatality rate of 52%. Healthy young adults collapsed with severe respiratory distress, often dying within days. The outbreak was traced back to everyday encounters, sweeping out a shed, cleaning a cabin, or simply breathing in dust where mice had nested. The invisible danger had moved from the ecosystem into the home. This was not a random act of nature. The outbreak followed a clear ecological script. one that scientists can now track in near real time. Satellite vegetation data, rodent trapping metrics, and viral surveillance offer measurable warning signals. The Four Corners crisis became a textbook example of how environmental changes, especially those driven by climate swings like El Niño, can set off a cascade that ends in human disease. The same logic applies beyond the American Southwest. Whenever climate, ecology, and surveillance drift out of sync, the risk of spillover grows. The question is not just whether hantavirus could be the next global health crisis, but whether we are paying attention to the signals that warn us before the next spillover begins. In the early 1950s, thousands of soldiers stationed along the Korean peninsula began falling ill with a mysterious fever. Their symptoms were brutal: high fevers, internal bleeding, and kidney failure. Doctors called it Korean hemorrhagic fever, but the cause remained hidden for decades. Field hospitals became overwhelmed as cases climbed into the thousands, and nearly 1 in 10 infected soldiers died. The connection to rodents was not clear at first, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Outbreaks erupted wherever troops set up camp in areas teeming with field mice. It was not until 1978 that Korean scientists isolated the culprit, Hantavirus, from the lungs of the striped field mouse, finally linking a wartime epidemic to a naturally circulating rodent virus. In the southern reaches of Chile and Argentina, rural communities brace for a different kind of threat each year. Here, the Andes virus circulates among long-tailed rice rats, and the risk is not constant, it comes in waves. Every spring and summer, as the forests of Patagonia burst with new growth, rodent populations surge. More food means more mice, and more mice mean a greater chance that people working in fields, forests, or storage sheds will breathe in contaminated dust. These seasonal pulses drive recurring clusters of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, with case fatality rates that often reach 30 to 35%. Unlike the slow burn of COVID, these outbreaks are sharp, deadly, and intensely local. There is a twist unique to the Andes virus. While most hantavirus strains stop with the person who inhales them, Andes has shown it can sometimes leap from one human to another, usually among close family, caregivers, or healthcare workers. Even so, the virus struggles to move beyond these tight circles. Chains of transmission rarely extend past a handful of people before burning out. The threat is real, but it is not the kind that can sweep unchecked across continents. The Korean War and Patagonian outbreaks might seem worlds apart, yet both are driven by the same underlying forces. Rodents thrive when environmental conditions tip in their favor, after heavy rains during bumper crop years or when humans push deeper into wild or agricultural lands. Military encampments in Korea, like farms and logging camps in South America, create new contact zones where people and rodents collide. In both cases, the virus rides the wave of ecological change, not the currents of global travel or crowded cities. This pattern is not limited to war or wilderness. As climate swings become more extreme and land use shifts, these rodent booms and busts are happening in more places, more often. Each spike in rodent numbers brings a fresh round of exposure risk. Yet without strong surveillance systems, many outbreaks go undetected until hospitals fill or headlines break. The lesson is clear: hantavirus is not a single sudden threat, but a recurring risk that follows the rhythms of climate, ecology, and human activity. The next crisis may not look like the last, and it may not come from where we expect. Early warning systems are supposed to be the world's first line of defense against emerging diseases, but when it comes to hantavirus, those systems are full of gaps. The Global Health Security Index, which tracks countries' ability to detect and respond to outbreaks, gives even wealthy nations middling scores for zoonotic surveillance. In 2024, the United States rated just 57 out of 100 for rodent-borne disease detection. China, Chile, and Argentina, all with recent hantavirus outbreaks, scored even lower. These numbers aren't just academic, they reflect real-world gaps in lab networks, field reporting, and the ability to spot a spillover before it spreads. Funding cycles make the problem worse. After every major hantavirus event, research budgets and surveillance grants spike, only to collapse once the headlines fade. In the United States, Hantavirus research funding dropped by more than half within 3 years of the Four Corners outbreak. NIH grants fell from $12 million in 1994 to $5 million by 1997. A similar pattern played out after the 2026 cruise ship cluster, with emergency funds rushed in, then quietly withdrawn as attention shifted elsewhere. Reporting delays compound these weaknesses. In rural areas, outbreaks often go undetected for weeks. Local clinics may lack PCR tests, and deaths are sometimes misclassified as pneumonia or kidney failure. It's a slow-motion chain reaction, underfunded detection, delayed reporting, and political hesitation to announce bad news. As Dr. Tom Inglesby, a leading voice on health security, has warned, you can't fight what you can't see, and you can't see what you don't test for. The result is a world where the first signs of a regional crisis may be missed, setting the stage for escalation. Rumors can outpace reality in a matter of hours. The 2026 Hantavirus cruise ship cluster proved it. Before the World Health Organization could finish its risk assessment, hashtags warning of new COVID surged across social media, outnumbering official statements 10 to 1. Panic spread faster than the virus itself. René DiResta, a leading expert on information flow, called it the infodemic before the epidemic. Within 48 hours, travel agencies saw mass cancellations, supply contracts froze, and port authorities in 3 countries refused to let the ship dock, all triggered by viral fear rather than viral facts. The economic aftershocks did not stop at tourism. Global supply chains rely on the smooth movement of goods through ports, warehouses, and freight terminals, places that double as rodent havens. In 2024, the Port of Los Angeles logged a 30% jump in rodent sightings, forcing a $12 million pest control overhaul. Insurance claims for rodent-related cargo damage worldwide reached $3.8 billion that same year. When a single port closes for quarantine, shipments back up for weeks, driving up prices and straining already fragile supply lines. Meanwhile, rural hospitals near outbreak zones face their own limits. Many lack rapid PCR tests or ICU beds. In the Andes region, diagnostic turnaround times can stretch to a week, delaying not just treatment but the accurate reporting that shapes public policy. With every delay, misinformation fills the vacuum, fueling more panic and economic fallout. The real danger is not just the virus, it is the chain reaction that begins with a trending rumor and ends with empty store shelves and overwhelmed clinics. As DiResta warns, when information breaks down, so does everything else. New pathogens will keep emerging as climate shifts and land use accelerates. Hantavirus reminds us deadliness and pandemic potential are not the same. Most strains pose regional threats, not global contagion, yet the systems that fail to spot one outbreak can miss the next. As environmental disruption continues, the real crisis may be ignoring the warning signs. What risks do we overlook today that become tomorrow's headlines? Share your thoughts below.